Two girls missing for 4 years. The truth revealed. When a dog broke into a hidden cave. The first frost of October had crept over the mountains like a whisper. Redwood Hollow was still half asleep when Rex began to growl. It wasn't his usual warning bark at a deer or raccoon. This one came from deep in his chest, low and steady, the kind that made Clara Bennett's skin tighten beneath her flannel. She was halfway through her first cup of coffee when it happened. The mug slipped from her hand and shattered against the porch. Rex stood rigid on the edge of the clearing, fur bristling, eyes locked on the tree line that climbed towards the ridge. "Easy, boy," she murmured. Her voice felt small against the silence. Rex didn't move. His breath steamed in the cold air, ears forward, every muscle drawn taut like a bowstring. Then, without warning, he bolted. "Rex!" Clara grabbed her coat and ran. Her boots pounded the frozen soil as she followed the shepherd's trail through the pines. She'd lived here 3 years now, far from the city, far from noise and memory. The forest had always felt like a friend, until that moment, when it suddenly felt like it was hiding something. The mist thickened as she climbed the ridge behind her cabin. She caught sight of Rex again, his tan and black coat flashing through the fog. He was digging near a limestone outcrop, paws striking stone with frantic precision. Clara slowed, heart hammering. "Rex, what are you doing?" The dog froze for a second, then gave a sharp bark, 2 short, 1 long. It was their signal, a habit from her years on the rescue team. Object found. Not animal. She dropped to her knees beside him. Beneath the moss and dirt, a corner of fabric peeked out, pale blue, frayed but clean. Clara tugged gently. The cloth came free with a wet sound, bringing with it the faint smell of antiseptic, not rot or mold. Embroidered at the edge was a tiny swan. Her breath caught. It couldn't be. 4 years ago, 2 sisters, Abby and Lila Porter, ages 8 and 11, had vanished from a rest stop 30 miles east. Search parties scoured every inch of these woods. They'd found nothing. Until now. Clara stared at the fabric, her pulse thudding in her ears. The thread pattern matched the one she'd seen on the news, handmade by the girl's grandmother. She'd watched that press conference back when she still worked emergency response, when she still believed every rescue ended in light. Rex pawed at the ground again, whined and looked towards the north ridge. His eyes burned with focus, not fear. He was waiting for her to follow. "No," Clara whispered, shaking her head. "Not yet." But he didn't wait. Rex turned and sprinted into the mist. Clara hesitated for a heartbeat, then stuffed the handkerchief into her pocket and went after him. The air tasted of iron and pine sap. Somewhere ahead, water dripped steadily onto rock. Rhythmic, deliberate, too even to be natural. When she reached him, Rex was crouched low beside a boulder, nose pressed to the base. The earth was disturbed, freshly turned despite the frost. Clara knelt beside him and scraped the surface with her gloves. Beneath a thin layer of mud lay a narrow crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Cold air seeped out, carrying a faint, sterile scent. Antiseptic again. And something else. Soap? Her stomach knotted. Someone had been here recently. A crow shrieked above, sharp enough to slice through the stillness. Clara flinched, looked up, then back at the crack. She slipped her flashlight from her belt and shined it inside. The beam caught on metal, a rusted hinge, half buried. A door. Rex growled again, stepping forward until his nose brushed the stone. Clara grabbed his collar, heart racing. "Hold on, boy. We don't know what's in there." But the look he gave her wasn't one of defiance. It was conviction. The kind she'd seen once before, when he'd dragged her out of a flooded ravine years ago, refusing to leave even as the current tore around them. She pressed a trembling hand against the rock. The cold bit through her glove. Beneath her palm, something shifted. A hollow echo came from inside, like air moving through a chamber. Then a sound. Soft, distant, unmistakable. A metallic clang. Rex snapped his head up, ears straining. Clara turned off the light, holding her breath. There it was again. Faint, but rhythmic. Like a gate closing, somewhere deep within the ridge. Her voice came out as a whisper. Is someone in there? The silence swallowed the words whole. Rex whimpered, low and uneasy. He circled once, then sat facing the opening, his tail curled tight. Guarding. Clara stepped back, her pulse steadying into resolve. She looked down at him and said quietly, "You found something the rest of us missed, didn't you?" Rex's ears twitched. Clara took out her satellite phone, the one she hadn't used in years, and hesitated before dialing. Sheriff Wells wouldn't believe her. No one would. Instead, she called a number she hadn't touched in half a decade. "Tom, it's Clara," she said when the line clicked alive. A pause. A sigh. "Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. I think I found where they've been keeping the Porter girls." Silence on the line then. "You're sure?" Her eyes dropped to the swan stitched into the cloth, gleaming faintly in the grey light. "Yeah," she said, "and someone's still up here." When she hung up, Rex was already on his feet, staring at the mouth of the ridge. The fog began to lift, revealing a sliver of sunlight cutting across the valley. For a long moment, Clara stood beside him, breathing in the sharp mountain air. The forest had been her refuge. Now it felt like a witness that had kept a terrible secret for too long. Rex barked once, clear and commanding. Clara looked at him. "All right," she said. "Show me." And together they stepped into the silence that had lasted 4 winters too long. By the next morning, the mountain had changed its skin. Overnight, a thin veil of snow had settled across Redwood Hollow, coating the pines and muting every sound. But even under that hush, Rex was restless. He paced the porch, nose twitching toward the north ridge, tail rigid like an antenna tuned to something only he could sense. Clara tried to ignore it. She stood at the sink, the blue handkerchief sealed inside a plastic bag beside her coffee mug. The embroidered swan seemed to stare back at her. She'd washed the dirt off, but not the thought that came with it. 4 years. 2 missing girls. A piece of cloth preserved as if time hadn't dared touch it. Rex barked again. She looked out the window. He was standing at the tree line, head lifted, one paw frozen mid-air. Not the bark of curiosity, not the high alert of fear. This was something different, measured, deliberate. She stepped outside. The air was cold enough to sting. "What is it, boy?" Rex barked twice, trotted forward, then looked back, waiting for her to follow. The last time he'd done that, they'd found a trapped hiker under 6 feet of rubble. That memory pulled at her, back to the day she still believed her skills could save everyone. Before the flood. Before her son. She swallowed hard. "All right. Show me." They moved through the snow, past the fallen fence and the stream that froze shallow each winter. The old trail cut behind a ridge where the forest thickened. Clara hadn't walked it since the rescue that ended her career. 12 years ago, she'd pulled a man out of a collapsed ravine here. A man who didn't survive the helicopter ride down. She'd sworn she'd never come back. But Rex didn't know about vows. He only knew scent and instinct. Half a mile in, he stopped at a narrow gap between 2 boulders, the entrance to an old ravine she used to call the Cut. The snow here had melted unevenly, patches of dark mud showing through. Rex sniffed along the ground, then began to dig, sending up sprays of slush. Clara crouched beside him. The ground wasn't frozen solid. Someone had disturbed it recently. She brushed away the top layer and froze. A tire track. Faint, narrow, but too defined to be old. She leaned closer. The treads were from an off-road vehicle, heavy enough for mountain roads, but small enough to maneuver through tight passes. And recent. Maybe a day or two. Her pulse quickened. Someone's been up here? Rex whined softly, nose pressed to the edge of the track. He followed it a few yards, then stopped where it disappeared beneath fresh snow. The air around them felt charged. Clara could almost hear her heartbeat echo off the trees. She straightened and pulled out her phone. A number she hadn't called in years sat under the contact name T. Calder. Her thumb hovered for a second. Then pressed. He answered on the third ring. "Bennett? Didn't think you remembered my number." "Rex found something," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "Fresh tire marks, near the old ravine, and that cloth yesterday. It's real, Tom." Silence. Then his voice lowered. "All business. Send coordinates." "You still working with Federal Rescue?" "Not officially," he said, "but I still know people who care about the truth." The line went dead. Clara looked at Rex. "You did good." He tilted his head, as if to ask what came next. By mid-afternoon, the crunch of tires broke the quiet. A dark SUV climbed the narrow road to her cabin, stopping near the woodpile. Tom Calder stepped out. Same heavy parka, same sharp eyes that used to miss nothing during missions. Age had carved deeper lines around his mouth, but his voice was the same steady, low tone. "You look like hell," he said. "So do you." They didn't bother with small talk. Clara showed him the handkerchief, the coordinates, the photos. He studied them without comment. "We need to see that site." They hiked out together as the sky dimmed. The snow reflected the last pale light, painting everything in shades of silver. Rex led, nose low, tail slicing the air. When they reached the ravine, Tom crouched beside the tire tracks. "No chains," he said. "Whoever's driving knows these roads, locals maybe. Or someone who's been here before," Clara said quietly. Rex sniffed ahead again, suddenly stiffening. He barked once and trotted towards the trees. Clara followed close behind, hand on the flashlight clipped to her belt. The dog stopped beside a fallen log and began pawing at something half-buried beneath frost. Tom knelt and brushed it free. A rusted food can, label still legible, expiration date from 6 months ago. "Survival rations," he said. "Military stock. You think, don't say it." Clara's stomach tightened. They followed the faint trail further into the hollow. The air grew colder, the trees denser. Rex stopped again, ears twitching. This time, he didn't bark. He lowered his head and let out a sound Clara had only heard twice before, a deep rumble that came from somewhere primal, older than fear. "What is it?" Tom whispered. Clara turned off her flashlight. The forest fell still. Then she heard it. Faint, metallic, echoing from the ridge above. Clang. Pause. Clang. "Someone's working up there," Tom said. "No," Clara murmured. "That's coming from inside." Rex growled again, moving closer to the sound. Clara followed, every muscle in her body on edge. The path narrowed, ending at a slope of rock and snow. A dark seam split the cliff face near the base, like a doorway half hidden by earth. Tom aimed his light. The beam caught metal, fresh scratch marks around a latch. "This was opened recently." Rex took a step forward, nose pressed to the crack. He inhaled, sharply, then whined. His body trembled with tension, not fear, anticipation. Clara knelt beside him. The air leaking through the gap smelled faintly of disinfectant, the same antiseptic note from the handkerchief. "Someone's been keeping that place clean." Tom straightened. "You think the girls could still be alive after 4 years?" Clara didn't answer. She looked at Rex. His gaze was fixed on the opening, unblinking. "Instinct never lies," she said quietly. He barked once in reply. Then, from deep within the ridge came another sound, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. A voice, thin, fragile, a single word. "Please." Clara froze. Tom's flashlight flickered. Rex lunged forward, claws scraping stone, barking loud enough to shake the trees. "Wait!" Clara grabbed his collar, heart hammering. The echo of his bark rolled through the forest and faded into the distance. Tom stared at her. "You heard it too?" She nodded slowly. It wasn't the wind. The cold settled around them, heavy and alive. The forest no longer felt empty. Somewhere inside that ridge someone had answered Rex, and whatever truth had been buried there for 4 years was ready to be found. The snow had stopped by morning, but the air in Redwood Hollow carried that heavy stillness before another storm. Clara and Tom followed Rex's steady pace up a trail that wound through the timberline toward the old quarry. It had been abandoned for over a decade, fenced off and forgotten, but Rex moved like he'd been there 100 times before. Tom adjusted his pack, his breath visible in the cold. "You're sure about this? We're miles from where those tire tracks were." "Rex isn't guessing," Clara said. "He's following something. Let him work." The dog's paws left clean prints in the snow as he climbed the ridge. His nose brushed the ground, tail straight, moving with purpose. Clara trusted that body language more than any GPS. When they reached the quarry rim, the world opened up below. A bowl of grey stone, dusted with frost, the remnants of machines half buried in ice. The place felt wrong, too quiet. Rex stopped at the edge and gave one short bark, then began descending along a path barely visible through the brush. Clara followed, sliding once, catching herself on a dead pine. The deeper they went, the more she felt that gnawing pull in her gut, the one she'd learned to listen to during her rescue years. Something here didn't want to stay hidden anymore. Rex stopped near a pile of collapsed limestone, sniffed hard, then started digging. His claws scraped against stone, sending up sparks of dust. Tom crouched beside him. Probably just another animal den. Rex froze, head snapping up. His ears turned toward a faint sound, metal against rock. A slow, echoing rhythm, almost like a chain dragging. Clara's breath hitched. "You hear that?" Tom frowned, listening. The sound faded, then came again, more distant this time. Could be wind moving through the shaft. "Wind doesn't sound like that," she said. Rex barked sharply, then pawed at something half buried near the rock face. Clara knelt beside him and brushed away snow. A glint of silver caught her eye. She pulled it free, muddy, bent, but unmistakable. A bracelet. Small, child-sized. The name engraved on the inside made her throat close. Lila. Tom exhaled. "Jesus." Clara turned the bracelet over in her palm. The metal was cold, but not corroded. "This hasn't been here long." He stood, scanning the ridge. "We should call it in, let the sheriff handle it." Clara shot him a look. Sheriff Wells was the one who handled it last time. He searched these woods for weeks and never came within a mile of this quarry. "That was 4 years ago. Things change." "Exactly," she said. "And now he doesn't want this reopened. You think that's a coincidence?" Tom hesitated. He knew her well enough to hear the edge in her voice, the old instinct kicking in. She wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. She was tracking evidence. Rex sniffed the bracelet in her hand, then looked up at the ridge above them. His tail lowered. A low growl rumbled from his chest. "What is it, boy?" Clara whispered. He barked once and stared north into the dense tree line. Tom pulled out his field radio. "I'll at least report that we found personal property tied to the case. That's procedure." Clara's hand shot out, stopping him. "You trust Wells?" He didn't answer. The look in his eyes was enough. They hiked back toward the truck in silence. The sun was already dipping, the horizon turning orange and steel. As they neared the cabin, the forest grew darker, the air colder. Rex stopped every few feet, glancing behind them. Clara tried to ignore it, but the unease stuck to her like frost. Inside, she placed the bracelet next to the handkerchief on her kitchen table. 2 pieces of evidence, 2 ghosts of children who hadn't vanished. They'd been hidden. She stared at them until her coffee went cold. By nightfall, the wind picked up. The roof creaked, branches scraped against the windows. Rex lay by the door, head on his paws, but his eyes never closed. Every few minutes he lifted his head, ears twitching toward the north ridge. Clara sat on the couch, a recorder on the table beside her. She'd started documenting everything: times, coordinates, scents, sounds, old habits. It made her feel like she still had control. Then Rex stood, stiff and alert, his ears pointed straight ahead. "What is it?" she asked softly. He growled low, then bolted to the door, pawing hard at the wood. Clara grabbed the flashlight and opened it. Cold air rushed in, carrying a faint metallic echo. Not the random howl of wind, but the same rhythm from the quarry, metal on stone, spaced like signals. She stepped outside, recording in hand. "It's 11:47 p.m., she whispered into the mic. "Sound recurring from the north ridge. Possible man-made source." Rex barked again, sharp and fast, his breath puffing white in the cold. The noise grew louder. Clang, pause, clang. Clara aimed the flashlight toward the trees, but saw only falling snow. Then it stopped. Total silence. Rex's growl deepened. He stood at the edge of the porch, body rigid, tail down. She could see his muscles tremble under his coat. "Come inside," she said. He didn't move. His nose lifted, sniffing the air. Then he looked back at her, eyes steady, commanding, as if to say, "Listen." The silence stretched until she could hear her own heartbeat. Then, faintly, from somewhere far up the ridge, a sound broke through again. This time, not metal. A single, high cry. Human. Clara's hand went numb around the recorder. Rex barked once, loud and defiant. The sound echoed through the forest and faded into the night. Clara turned off the recorder and looked at the dog. "We're not imagining this," she said quietly. Rex stepped closer, nose pressed against her hand, a warm pulse of breath grounding her back to reality. She glanced at the bracelet glinting faintly on the table through the window. Snow began to fall harder now, sweeping across the porch in thin veils. Clara reached down and stroked Rex's head. "We're not done," she whispered. "Whatever's up there, you're leading the way." He didn't bark again. He just sat beside her, facing the ridge, eyes locked on the darkness that had kept it secret for too long. And somewhere beyond the trees, buried beneath ice and time, the mountain whispered back with another faint metallic echo, as if answering the dog's call. By noon the next day the storm had buried the ridge under a foot of snow. The world looked clean again. Too clean, as if trying to erase the night before. Clara stood on her porch with the recorder in her pocket, staring at the tree line where the sound had come from. Rex sat beside her, still, his breath steaming in the frozen air. The crunch of tires broke the quiet. A county cruiser stopped at the foot of her drive. Sheriff Dorian Wells stepped out, his heavy coat dusted white, a cigarette already burning between his fingers. His face was lined, his jaw tight in that practiced small-town smile he used when he wanted to look harmless. "Morning, Miss Bennett," he said. "Heard you've been poking around the old quarry." She didn't answer. He nodded toward Rex. "That your dog making all that racket last night?" Got a few calls from folks down the valley. Sound carries. Rex's low growl rolled through the stillness. Wells' smile faltered. Mind if we talk? Clara crossed her arms. If you're here to tell me to stay out of it, save your breath. He looked down at the snow, then back at her. Look, I know what losing someone does. I read your file after that flood. You've been through enough. Then you know better than to tell me to stop when 2 kids might still be alive. Wells took a drag on his cigarette, exhaled slow. You think those girls are up there, after 4 years? I was the one who ran that search. We spent weeks combing every inch. It's over. Then explain this. Clara pulled the bracelet from her pocket and tossed it to him. He caught it awkwardly. The name Lila glinted in the pale light. His expression shifted for a fraction of a second. Shock, then something darker. He handed it back. Probably planted. People love to stir things up around tragedies. Who? She demanded. Who would plant that? He didn't answer. He just looked toward the ridge, then said quietly, Don't go back up there, Clara. That mountain keeps things buried for a reason. She watched him leave, snow crunching under his boots. When the cruiser disappeared down the road, Rex barked once, sharp and accusing. I know, she whispered. He's lying. That afternoon, Tom drove into town under the pretense of getting supplies, but his real target was the county records office. He spent an hour combing through archived permits and property logs until a single phrase caught his eye. Haven Program. Terminated 2017. It wasn't filed under county projects, but under Federal Child Welfare Initiative. He jotted down the reference code, then found a faded article from a local paper. The headline read, Experimental Reintegration Project for Missing Youth Suspended After Funding Scandal. The accompanying photo showed a smiling Sheriff Dorian Wells standing beside a group of children, his hand resting on the shoulder of a girl with blonde braids. The caption, Sheriff Wells visits Haven's rural rehabilitation site. Tom felt his stomach drop. The date on the article was only a month before the Porter girls vanished. He took photos of the records and sent them to Clara with a single text. We were right. He was involved. Back at the cabin, Rex had been pacing for hours. When Tom returned, the dog barked twice, tail rigid. Clara frowned. He's been like this since Wells left. Keeps going to the back door. Tom handed her his phone. She scrolled through the photos, her pulse quickening. So that's why he didn't want me digging. He was part of it. Looks that way, Tom said. Officially, Haven was supposed to rehabilitate abducted kids before reuniting them with families, but there's no record of where those kids actually went. Rex barked again, more urgent this time. He pawed at the floorboards near the hearth, nose pressed against the cracks. What is it, boy? Clara knelt beside him. The wood was cold, damp along one edge. She pried at a loose board and found dirt underneath, fresh, darker than the soil around it. Rex dug faster, sending splinters flying. Something metallic clinked against his claws. Clara reached in and pulled out a rusted padlock. Its loop snapped. She glanced toward the window, the direction of the ridge. That came from the quarry. Tom shook his head. You're sure? The lock stamped Haven property, same logo from the article. Before she could say more, Rex ran to the door and barked twice, then stared at her. His whole body trembled. Not fear, not excitement, but something like urgency. He wants to go back up, Clara said. Tom grabbed his coat. Then we go before Wells decides to tail us. They reached the quarry as the sky turned violet. Snow crunched beneath their boots. The air smelled faintly of metal and pine. Rex led them past the old machinery to the rock wall where they'd found the bracelet. He circled once, sniffing, then began digging again. Faster, more frantic. Clara knelt to help, her gloves scraping against frozen dirt. The ground here was harder than before, packed tight as if tamped down by weight. Then Rex stopped and let out a single sharp bark. He stepped back, paw raised. Under the surface, just visible through the soil, were deep parallel grooves. Clara brushed them clean with shaking hands. They weren't animal marks. They were fingernail scratches, human, desperate. She stared at them, throat tight. Someone was alive here, trying to get out. Tom swallowed hard. Jesus Christ! Rex sat beside the marks, his eyes locked on Clara's face. The fur along his neck bristled. He whined softly, almost mournfully. Clara pressed her gloved hand against the stone. The scratches were small, uneven. A child's. The image burned into her mind. Tiny hands clawing at rock, trapped in the dark. Tom spoke low. If this connects to Wells, it's not just negligence, it's cover-up. Clara's eyes filled with cold fire. Then we uncover it. The wind rose, carrying with it the faint metallic echo again. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching, as if confirming what she already knew. Clara stood, staring toward the ridge. She remembered the night the flood took her son, how the rescuers had told her there was nothing more they could do, how she'd walked away before the search was done. She'd believed stopping spared her pain, but now, standing before the marks of a child who'd kept fighting until the last breath, she understood. If she stopped now, she'd lose them too. She looked down at Rex. We're not stopping, not this time. Rex barked once, short and sure. The sound echoed through the hollow, swallowed by the storm brewing over the mountain. For the first time in years, Clara felt that old certainty return. Not hope, not faith, but instinct. And instinct never lies. The mountain was silent except for the rush of water. Midnight light bled through the fog, silvering the pines. Clara led the way with Tom behind her, their headlamps cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. Rex moved ahead, a shadow among shadows, his breath misting in quick bursts. Every few seconds he stopped, nose to the ground, tail rigid, listening to something the others couldn't hear. They had returned to the ridge after hours of debate, driven by the marks in the stone and the unanswered echo that had haunted the night before. The sheriff hadn't come back, but Clara was sure he would soon. Whatever was buried here, someone wanted it to stay that way. Rex stopped suddenly, ears flicking forward. The sound of water grew louder, the low roar of the falls that cascaded from the northern face. Clara tightened her grip on the flashlight. Tom caught up beside her. You sure this is it? Rex is sure, she said. They moved carefully down the slope until they reached the base of the waterfall. The spray hit their faces, freezing cold. Rex paced along the rocks, nose pressed to the wet moss, then froze at a cluster of vines thick as rope that hung against the cliff. He barked once, then began tearing at the vines with his teeth. Clara dropped beside him, helping to pull them away. Beneath the curtain of green was something she hadn't expected, an opening, narrow and black, about 3 feet wide, hidden perfectly behind the falling water. Jesus, Tom muttered. That's a man-made cut. Someone sealed it off. Rex pressed his body to the ground, sniffing, then without hesitation crawled into the gap. Clara started after him, but Tom grabbed her arm. Wait, we don't know what's inside. She met his eyes. We already know what's inside, we just don't know who's left. A muffled bark came from within, 2 short, 1 long. Their old rescue code. Clara's breath caught. He found someone. Tom's jaw tightened. Or something. They ducked through the entrance. The air inside was cold and stale, smelling faintly of metal and disinfectant. Clara's flashlight cut across the walls, smooth concrete beneath a layer of mineral crust. It wasn't a cave at all. It was a tunnel. They followed the curve downward, footsteps echoing softly. The sound of the waterfall faded behind them. Ahead, Rex's nails clicked on the floor. He paused at every corner, sniffing, listening, then moved on. Ventilation shafts. Tom whispered, pointing his light upward. That's why the air's still moving. Someone engineered this. Clara nodded, voice low. Haven program built underground sites for rehabilitation, didn't they? Tom hesitated. Yeah, but they were supposed to be decommissioned. Rex stopped again. His tail dropped. A deep rumble started in his chest. Clara raised her flashlight and froze. There were beds, 4 of them, lined neatly against the wall. Each had a blanket, small, colorless military issue. On the far side, a shelf of food cans, all recent, a plastic jug of water, half empty. Someone's been living here, Tom said. No, Clara whispered. Someone's been keeping them alive. The faintest noise echoed from deeper. Inside, metal scraping on metal. Rex stiffened, hackles rising. He lowered himself close to the ground, ears locked forward, eyes sharp. Wait, Clara whispered. Let him lead. Rex crept forward, one slow step at a time. The tunnel narrowed, and the air turned damp. Water dripped rhythmically from the ceiling. At the end of the passage stood a steel door, half buried in rockfall. It wasn't locked. It had been barricaded from the inside. Clara pressed her ear against it. Silence. Then the faintest sound, something between a sob and a breath. Tom raised his hand. Hold on. Could be a trap. We don't know who else is here. But Clara wasn't listening. She crouched beside Rex, placing her hand gently on his back. Easy, boy, she murmured. He looked at her, eyes steady, and gave a single low whine. Then, from the other side of the door, came a sound that turned her blood cold. A voice, high, weak, but unmistakably human. Help us. Clara's flashlight trembled in her grip. She looked at Tom, who was already pulling at the debris blocking the door. Together they shifted rocks until the gap widened enough for Rex to slip through first. He disappeared inside without hesitation. For a long moment, all they could hear was his breathing. Then a bark, loud, sharp, alive. Clara followed. The light from her flashlight swept over the space beyond, a chamber no larger than a cellar, its walls covered in condensation. 2 small figures sat huddled against the far corner, wrapped in thin blankets. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. One of them blinked against the sudden light. "Oh, God," Tom whispered. "It's them. Abby and Lila Porter." Clara's knees almost gave out. She moved slowly toward them, hands shaking. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now." Rex crawled closer to the girls and pressed his muzzle against Lila's hand. The child let out a small cry and clung to him, burying her face in his neck. Clara felt her throat tighten. "He found you," she whispered. "He never gave up." But before the relief could take root, Tom's voice cut through, tense and low. "Clara, we've got a problem." She turned. He was pointing at a second door on the far wall. Newer, clean, sealed tight. A red indicator light glowed faintly near the handle. "Whoever built this," he said. "They planned to come back." Rex growled, stepping between the door and the girls. The sound was deep, controlled, protective. His gaze never wavered from the metal frame, as if he could sense movement behind it. Clara looked at the light again. It wasn't just glowing, it was blinking. Tom swore under his breath. "That's a motion sensor." The sound of gears shifting echoed through the corridor behind them. Metal grated against stone. "They know we're here," Clara said. Rex barked once, sharp as a gunshot, then took position by the exit, teeth bared. Clara pulled the girls closer, voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "We're getting you out. Now." The tunnel shuddered as something heavy began to move on the other side of the steel door. Dust rained from the ceiling. The red light turned solid. Rex barked again, the same pattern as before, 2 short, 1 long, the signal that had started this all. "Find the way, boy," Clara said, grabbing the flashlight. "Take us out." And he did, darting through the shadows, leading them back toward the roar of the waterfall, his instincts cutting through the dark like a compass that had never been wrong. Behind them, metal slammed, echoing through the hollow. Whoever had built this place was awake again. But Rex didn't look back. Neither did Clara. The night swallowed them whole, and the mountain seemed to close its mouth over the secret it had just begun to reveal. The air inside the tunnel was heavy, wet, and alive with echoes. Every drip of water hit the stone like a heartbeat. Clara led the way, her flashlight trembling across the walls as they pushed deeper into the chamber where Rex had first barked. Tom followed close behind, the 2 girls between them, both shivering under thin blankets that smelled of mold and fear. Rex stayed ahead, moving carefully, every muscle tense. He didn't make a sound, but his ears flicked with every noise that came from the dark. Clara crouched beside the girls. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly. "We're getting you out of here." One of the girls, the older one, Abby, blinked through tears. Her voice came out hoarse. "He said no one would come." "Who?" Tom asked. The younger girl, Lila, pointed toward the far wall. Clara turned her light. There, half buried under dust, was a laminated photo tacked to the concrete. 6 smiling adults stood in front of a white building. Above them, faded text read, "Haven Program Rehabilitation Unit, Redwood Facility." In the center of the photo was Sheriff Wells. His arm rested around the shoulder of a younger man in a federal uniform. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. He built this. Lila's lip trembled. "He used to bring us food, said he'd find our parents when we were ready. Then he stopped coming." Tom stared at the image, his jaw tightening. "That's why he warned you off. He wasn't trying to protect you. He was protecting this." Rex growled low, moving closer to the tunnel entrance. His fur stood on end. Clara froze. "What is it?" Before Tom could answer, a harsh beam of light cut through the darkness behind them. Voices followed, low, sharp, and far too controlled to be local hikers. "Don't move," a man shouted. The sound of safety's clicking echoed off the stone. Clara spun, shielding the girls. 4 figures emerged from the tunnel, all dressed in black tactical gear, their rifles raised. The one in front had his face half covered, but his voice carried authority. "Step away from the children." Tom stepped forward, hands raised. "We're rescue workers. The girls were trapped. You shouldn't be here." The man interrupted. "This site is classified." "Classified?" Clara's voice cracked. "These are missing children. What the hell kind of operation buries kids alive?" The man hesitated, but the muzzle of his gun didn't lower. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Rex barked once, sharp and furious, stepping between Clara and the gun. His teeth flashed in the dim light. The soldiers flinched back. "Hold your fire," the leader snapped. "Don't hit the dog." Clara felt a flicker of recognition in the man's tone. Something off, like he wasn't entirely in control. Tom noticed it too. "Who are you working for?" he demanded. The man didn't answer. Behind him, one of the soldiers muttered into a radio. "We've got them. 2 civilians, 1 K9. Repeat, subject secured." Rex's growl deepened. He moved slightly to the left, tail rigid, eyes locked on the radio. Clara saw the shift and whispered, "Easy, boy. Wait for it." Tom's hand brushed his jacket pocket where the flare gun rested. His voice stayed calm. "You realize if those kids die down here, you're done. The press will bury you faster than this cave ever could." The leader's jaw twitched. "You think anyone's coming? No one even knows this site exists." But he was wrong. Clara's recorder was still running, its red light faint but alive in her pocket. Every word, every threat was being saved. Behind them, the girls whimpered. Lila clutched the photo of Wells to her chest. Suddenly, Rex lunged, not at the men, but at the wall beside them. His paws struck a weak seam in the stone. The impact cracked the surface, sending a thunderous echo through the tunnel. Dust exploded into the air. "Earthquake!" one of the soldiers shouted. "Move!" Clara grabbed the girls and ran toward the main passage. Tom fired the flare gun straight into the light of the nearest rifle, blinding the shooter. The red flare ricocheted off the ceiling, scattering sparks that hissed like fireflies. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets hit the stone, showering them with debris. Rex darted ahead, barking, leading them through the turns he remembered. "Keep low!" Tom yelled. They sprinted after the dog, lungs burning. The air filled with smoke and dust. Clara clutched both girls, feeling their ribs under her arms, too thin, too fragile. When they reached the main tunnel, the distant rumble of the waterfall grew louder again. Rex didn't stop until they reached the mouth of the cave. He turned, body tense, watching the shadows behind them. Clara crouched, holding Lila close. "It's okay. You're safe now." Lila's voice shook. "He came back." Clara froze. "Who?" The girl looked at Rex through tears, her small hand gripping his fur. "The dog. He came back for us." Rex leaned into her touch, pressing his muzzle against her palm, his eyes steady and soft. Then Tom's voice came from behind. "Clara, look." She turned. At the tunnel entrance, framed by the falling water, stood Sheriff Wells. His uniform was soaked, his badge glinting faintly. Behind him, the armed men waited in silence. He looked older now, tired, but not surprised. "Put the girls down," he said quietly. "You don't understand what you're walking into." Clara stepped forward, rage and disbelief colliding inside her. "You were supposed to protect them." "I did," Wells said. "You think this was kidnapping? Haven saved those girls. You have no idea what their parents did." "Enough," Tom said. "You're coming with us." Wells shook his head slowly. "No one leaves this place alive if they know." Rex snarled, his body coiled like a spring. The sheriff's hand moved toward his holster, and for a heartbeat, everything hung in silence. The waterfall roaring like thunder outside, the girls frozen in terror, the cold air trembling with what was about to happen. Then Rex barked once, deep and commanding. The girls flinched, but Clara understood. That was his signal. "Stand behind me." She pulled them close, whispering, "Don't look." And as the men raised their weapons, the shepherd leapt forward into the light, a streak of gold and muscle and fury, breaking the fear that had held them captive for 4 long years. The blast of the waterfall outside muffled everything, but the echo of boots against rock still carried like gunfire. Clara pulled Abby and Lila behind a fallen slab, pressing a finger to her lips. Tom crouched beside her, pistol drawn, eyes flicking between the 2 shadows that had stepped into the cave mouth. Sheriff Wells was one of them. The second man, taller, younger, with the rigid calm of someone trained to kill, wore a faded FBI windbreaker. The name tag on his vest was scratched out, but Clara caught the glint of a badge tucked into his belt. "Agent Pierce," Tom muttered under his breath. "He was suspended last year. Corruption charges." Pierce smiled when he heard the name. "Good to know someone still remembers me." Wells looked at Clara, his face pale in the beam of his flashlight. "Put the gun down, Tom. You're making this worse." "Worse," Clara hissed. "You buried kids alive, Wells. How does it get worse?" Wells shook his head. You don't understand. I tried to stop it. Pierce turned sharply. You tried to get out. There's a difference. He stepped closer, his weapon raised, and for the first time Clara saw it clearly. A silenced Glock. Professional. Recently cleaned. Not the kind a local deputy carried. You were the cleanup crew, Tom said. You worked for Haven. Pierce's grin was ice. Still do, technically. My job is to erase what's left of it. You, the girls, this entire site. Rex growled, low from the shadows, the sound rolling through the cave like thunder. He stood between the men and Clara, body tense, teeth bared. Pierce pointed his gun toward the dog. Call him off, or I'll put him down. Wells' jaw clenched. Don't. Pierce turned on him. You've been soft ever since that audit came down. I told you, this isn't a rescue. It's containment. Wells's hand twitched near his holster. They're kids, Pierce. You were supposed to protect them, not what? Pierce cut him off. Not let them talk? They've been trained, Wells, conditioned. If they start telling stories, it's not just your badge on the line. Something in Wells cracked. The weight of years showed in his eyes. I've lived with that guilt long enough. Pierce raised his gun higher. Then you won't live much longer. The shot came fast. Rex moved faster. He launched forward, colliding with Pierce's arm. The gun fired wild, the bullet skimming Rex's shoulder before smashing into the stone wall. His yelp cut through the cave, raw and furious. Clara screamed his name, but Rex was already back on his feet, standing between her and the gun, blood darkening his fur. Pierce stumbled, cursing, trying to steady his aim. Tom fired from cover, the shot catching Pierce's leg. He fell to one knee, gun clattering away. Rex! Clara crawled toward the dog. He turned his head toward her, panting hard, tail stiff, eyes still locked on Pierce. His bark tore through the chamber, 2 short, 1 long, the old rescue signal, the same one he used when he found life. Outside, faintly beneath the roar of the waterfall, another sound began to rise. Sirens. Pierce froze. What did you do? Clara pressed a hand to Rex's neck. You think he was barking for nothing? Tom smirked. She recorded everything. It's being transmitted. Wells looked at Clara, something like shame, or maybe resolve, washing over his face. They're coming, Pierce. It's over. But Pierce didn't believe in endings. He lunged for the fallen weapon, grabbing it with blood-slick fingers. He swung it toward Clara. Not for me. Before he could fire, Wells drew his revolver. The shot cracked through the cave, deafening in the close air. Pierce jerked, his eyes wide with disbelief, then fell backward into the dust. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the waterfall outside kept moving, constant, relentless. Wells lowered his gun, shoulders shaking. I was supposed to protect them, he whispered. I was supposed to protect all of them. Clara stared at him, breathing hard. Then help me finish it. He nodded slowly. The files, they're in my truck. Everything about Haven. Names, funding, the contractors who built this place. Tom moved closer, keeping his weapon trained on the entrance. We'll take it, but you're coming with us. Wells hesitated, then nodded again. I'll testify. It's the least I can do. Rex limped toward him, the fur around his wound slick with blood. Wells knelt, hesitating before reaching to touch his head. Rex didn't growl this time. He just looked at him, long and steady, as if measuring the man's intent. I'm sorry, boy. Wells said softly. For all of it. From deeper in the tunnel came the faint sound of approaching boots. Reinforcements, maybe, or more of Pierce's men. They didn't wait to find out. Clara and Tom helped the girls to their feet. As they hurried towards the exit, Wells stayed behind for a heartbeat, staring down at Pierce's body. He whispered something none of them caught, then turned and followed into the light. Outside, the sirens grew louder. A helicopter spotlight cut through the trees, sweeping across the rocks like daylight breaking open the dark. Clara stumbled into the clearing, clutching Abby and Lila close. Rex walked beside her, limping but proud, his eyes fierce despite the pain. Tom was last, scanning the ridge, making sure no one followed. Behind them, the cave mouth rumbled. A section of the rock collapsed, sealing the entrance under a cloud of dust. Wells turned to Clara, voice breaking. "Maybe it's better that way." Clara looked down at Rex, who sat beside her, watching the falling debris with a steady gaze. "No," she said. "The truth doesn't stay buried. Not anymore." Somewhere above, the chopper light fixed on them. Rex lifted his head and barked, once strong and clear, echoing across the valley like a declaration. For the first time in 4 years, the mountain answered. Snow had started to fall before they even reached the mouth of the cave. The flakes came heavy and fast, erasing footprints as soon as they were made. Clara could barely see 10 feet ahead. But she didn't stop running. She had one arm around Lila, the other gripping Abby's hand. Tom followed close behind, half carrying Rex, whose blood streaked crimson through the snow. Behind them, a single gunshot echoed. Clara spun instinctively, but the glare of her flashlight caught only falling dust and shadow. Sheriff Wells stood at the cave's edge, his revolver raised, blood spreading dark across his chest. He fired once more into the tunnel, one last shot to cover their escape. "Go!" he shouted, voice hoarse. "Get them out!" Then the mountain swallowed him. Tom pulled Clara's arm. "We have to move now." She stumbled forward, half dragged by momentum, heart pounding with the rhythm of Rex's labored breathing. The dog still refused to slow down, limping but alert, his gaze fixed on the narrow path ahead, as if sheer will alone could guide them to safety. The storm grew worse. Wind tore through the trees, bending the pines until they creaked like bones. But somewhere above the roar, Clara heard it, the deep chop of rotor blades. A helicopter. "Over here!" Tom yelled, waving his flashlight toward the sky. The beam flickered in the flurries, barely visible, but enough to catch the pilot's attention. The chopper tilted, floodlights cutting through the dark, sweeping across the ridge. Rex barked once, loud and defiant, before collapsing into the snow. Clara dropped to her knees beside him. His fur was soaked, his wound seeping through the makeshift bandage Tom had tied with his torn sleeve. She pressed her hands against the wound, her breath trembling. "Stay with me, boy. We're almost there." Rex's eyes met hers, steady, tired, but still aware. He lifted his head just enough to look towards the cave. His body went still, ears twitching. Tom followed his gaze. "He's guarding the entrance," he said softly. Even bleeding, even half-frozen, Rex still faced the cave, standing weakly on trembling legs, a sentry between the children and whatever might still crawl out from the dark. Moments later, rescue teams broke through the tree line, men in orange jackets, radios crackling, ropes dragging behind them. The lead rescuer shouted, "We've got civilians! 2 miners!" Clara felt hands pulling her to her feet, wrapping blankets around her and the girls. Abby clung to her side, refusing to let go. Lila buried her face in Rex's fur, whispering something too soft to hear. Tom waved the rescuers toward the cave. "There's one more inside. Sheriff Wells, he's hit bad." 2 medics disappeared into the darkness with stretchers. Another knelt beside Rex, checking his wound. "He's lost a lot of blood. We'll patch him enough to move." Rex didn't resist. He simply stood there, shivering, eyes never leaving the cave mouth. Minutes stretched like hours until the medics returned. Between them was a stretcher covered by a silver blanket. The sight pulled the air from Clara's lungs. She stepped closer, kneeling beside the body. Snow gathered in Wells's hair, his badge still pinned crookedly to his chest. Tom removed his cap, lowering his head. Clara whispered, "At least he tried to end it right." No one said anything. The snow fell thicker now, muting the world, turning the valley white as bone. One of the rescuers reported over the radio. Pierce's body recovered inside, still breathing. He's going to federal custody. Clara stared at the cave one last time. Then let him live long enough to face what he did. They started the climb down the ridge. The helicopter's searchlight followed, washing the forest in pale gold. Rex walked between the girls, limping, but refusing to be carried. Each step seemed to hurt, yet he pressed on, head high, as if he knew this was his final watch. By the time they reached the clearing, the chopper had landed. Medics guided the children aboard first, wrapping them in heated blankets. Clara followed, pausing at the door to look back. The rescue team was securing Wells's body, covering him gently, as though honoring an old soldier. The mountain behind them loomed, silent, its secrets sealed again beneath the snow. Clara turned to Rex. He sat by her boot, muzzle lifted toward the storm, eyes reflecting the chopper's light. "You can rest now," she whispered. He blinked once and laid his head against her leg. When they lifted off, the valley below was already vanishing under the blizzard. The cave was gone from sight, but in the beam of the searchlight, the snow seemed to shimmer, each flake catching the light like falling glass. Clara held the girls close as the helicopter rose higher. Abby whispered, "Is it over?" Clara looked out the window at the endless white below. "For now," she said, "but silence always leaves a debt, and tonight we finally paid it." Rex stirred, pressing his nose to her hand. His fur was warm under her palm, alive. She smiled faintly through the tears. The radio crackled as the pilot spoke to the base. "Survivors secured. 2 minors, 1 K9 injured, 2 deceased, 1 in custody." Clara closed her eyes, letting the words settle. For the first time in 4 years, they weren't just names in a file. They were alive, found, heard. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, endless and forgiving, covering the wounds of the mountain, but not the memory of what it had taken to make it speak. A month had passed since the mountain swallowed its last secret. Winter loosened its grip, and the snow around the ridge melted into small rivers that carried away the blood and memory of what had happened. Yet for Clara, the echoes of that night still lingered. The sharp sound of gunfire, the weight of Wells's last look, and the trembling heartbeat of Rex against her palm. The girls were recovering. Abby had begun to speak again, her voice fragile but sure. Lila still slept with the lights on, but she laughed now, small bursts that felt like sunlight through clouds. The state placed them in a recovery center in Ashford, where trauma counselors and therapy dogs worked side by side. Clara visited every week. The first time she arrived, Rex limped in behind her, tail low but wagging. When the girls saw him, the room erupted in tears. Abby buried her face in his fur, whispering, "He came back again." Rex licked her hand and laid down beside her bed, staying still as if he understood the quiet healing taking place. From that day on, the center asked Clara if Rex could become part of the therapy program. He didn't need training. The children came to him naturally, like he carried something in his eyes that said, "You're safe now." Rex became a symbol. Newspapers called him the shepherd who broke the silence, but Clara refused interviews. She didn't want to be a story, she wanted peace. When the state issued a citation of honor for heroic civilian service, she mailed it back, unsigned. Tom didn't stop digging. A week after the rescue, he called Clara from his office, his tone low and edged with exhaustion. "Pierce didn't act alone," he said. "The funding for Haven traces back to a private biomedical foundation. Government contracts, military involvement, child behavior research. Wells was right. Haven wasn't a shelter. It was an experiment." Clara's stomach turned cold. And the girls? They were part of the control group, brought in young, tested for resilience after trauma. Someone wanted to know how far fear could go before the human mind broke. She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles went white. "Are they going to pay for it?" Tom hesitated. "Some of them will. Others are still hidden, but this time we have names." That night, Clara sat outside her small cabin on the edge of Hollow Ridge. The storm had stripped the trees bare, but the air smelled of thawing earth. Rex lay beside her, head resting on her knee, eyes half closed in the fading light. She ran her fingers along the scar on his shoulder. "You're lucky," she whispered. "Scars mean you lived." He opened one eye, huffed softly, and nudged her hand for another scratch. The rescue reward she received went untouched until the day she drove past an abandoned kennel outside of town, a small, weathered building once used by animal control. The roof sagged, the paint peeled, and the sign out front still read, "Closed by order." But when she stood there, wind blowing through the broken window panes, Clara felt something she hadn't in years. Purpose. A month later, with Tom's help and a few quiet donors, the place reopened under a new name, the Hollow Haven. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a refuge for both people and dogs that had seen too much of the dark. On opening day, only a few came. A veteran with shaking hands, a teenage boy who hadn't spoken since the car crash that killed his parents, and a single mother holding a stray pup in a blanket. Rex greeted them all, walking slowly from person to person, tail swishing, never demanding attention, just being there. The way he looked at them wasn't pity. It was recognition. Tom arrived later, carrying a box of old case files. He set it on her desk. "Evidence copies. Everything from Haven. It's over, but I figured you'd want them." Clara nodded, glancing at the box without opening it. "Maybe someday," she said quietly. He leaned on the door frame, watching the sunlight catch the dust motes drifting through the air. "You ever think about leaving this place?" She smiled faintly. "No, I think about what it could become." Outside, laughter rang from the yard, Abby and Lila chasing Rex through the grass, their shoes kicking up bits of melting snow. He ran slower now, but his tail wagged high, his bark strong and clear. Tom watched them for a long moment. "He looks happy." "He is," Clara said. "He found what he was guarding all along." Tom frowned slightly. "What's that?" "Home." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and rain. In the distance, thunder rolled, soft and far away. The storm had passed, but its memory shaped everything that stood in its wake. The two girls learning to live again, a woman rebuilding what she'd lost, and a dog who refused to stop protecting the broken pieces of the world. That evening, as dusk settled over the valley, Clara hung a small wooden sign above the gate. It read, "The Hollow Haven, for those who were lost and those who found them." Rex sat beneath it, his scar catching the last light of the sunset. For a moment, his ears twitched toward the forest, the place where it all began. And he gave one low bark, as if promising the mountain that the silence was broken for good. Then he turned back toward the laughter behind him, his tail sweeping the dirt, ready to guard what he had helped rebuild. A year had passed since the night the mountains of Redwood Hollow gave up their ghosts. The snow had returned, blanketing the hills in quiet white. But this time, it didn't feel like a shroud. It felt like peace. At the edge of the clearing stood the Hollow Haven, once an abandoned kennel, now alive with the sound of laughter and barking. Children played in the yard, veterans stacked wood for the stove, and a woman named Clara Bennett stood near the doorway, watching it all with the soft, knowing smile of someone who had learned how to live again. And in front of the cabin, on the same spot where he had stood guard that first terrible night, lay Rex, He wasn't as strong now. His fur had silvered around the muzzle, his gait slower. But his eyes, sharp, amber, and eternal, still scanned the tree line as if the mountain might one day call for him again. His body rested, but his purpose never had. That morning, a van wound its way up the frozen path. A group of journalism students from the State University stepped out, bundled in scarves and gloves, cameras hanging from their necks. Their instructor had assigned them to cover the 4-year miracle, the story of the 2 missing girls who'd been found alive thanks to a rescue dog and a stubborn woman who wouldn't stop digging. Clara met them at the gate, smiling politely as one of the students, a young woman with a red beanie, extended her hand. "Mrs. Bennett, thank you for letting us visit. We've been reading about you and Rex for months." Clara chuckled. "He's the one you should thank. I just followed him." The students looked around the yard, some crouching to pet the younger rescue dogs that bounded over. "Is he still here?" one asked eagerly. Clara pointed toward the porch. Rex lifted his head as if on cue, eyes reflecting the snowlight. The students approached quietly, reverently, as though standing before something sacred. "He's beautiful," one of them whispered. "He's old," Clara said softly, "but he's earned every grey hair." They set up their cameras, filming the kennels, the play area, and the framed photographs on the wall inside, Wells's badge, Tom's commendation letter, and a small photo of 2 smiling girls holding Rex's leash. When the interview began, the red beanie student asked, "Why did you name this place the Hollow Haven?" Clara looked out the window towards the ridge. "Because that hollow tried to take everything from us, so I decided it would give something back." Another student leaned forward. "What do you think made Rex keep going that night, even when he was injured?" Clara smiled faintly, turning her gaze toward the dog outside. "Because he knew someone was still in the dark. That's what shepherds do. They don't stop until everyone's home." The wind outside picked up, rattling the pine branches. A few of the kids ran past the window, their laughter cutting through the hush of the snow. Rex stirred, lifting himself slowly, bones stiff but spirit unbroken. He padded a few steps forward, sat down again, facing the tree line. The students followed her gaze, cameras rolling. One of them whispered, "He still guards the forest." Clara nodded. "He always will." They filmed in silence for a long while, the steady breath of the dog, the snow falling gently, the faint echo of the mountains in the distance. Finally, one of the students asked, "Mrs. Bennett, if there's one thing you'd want people to remember from your story, what would it be?" Clara's smile deepened. She reached down to touch the collar hanging near the doorway, the one Rex wore that night, still scratched and scarred. Then she looked back at the camera. "He didn't bark for food," she said quietly. "He barked for the truth." The students went silent. Outside, Rex lifted his head again as if he understood. His ears perked toward the woods, his nose twitching at the scent of the cold wind. Then, with a low rumble that grew into a full, deep bark, he called out to the forest one last time. The sound rolled down the ridge, echoing across the valley, mixing with the wind, strong, proud, alive. The camera held the image. The old shepherd, still guarding his post, framed against the falling snow. As the students packed up, one of them wiped his eyes. "He's more than a dog," he murmured. Clara nodded. "He's what the best of us should be." The helicopter sound of the wind grew louder as the camera panned out. From above, the Hollow Haven glowed warm against the white of the mountain, a small heartbeat of light in a cold world. The snow kept falling, soft as memory, and as the screen faded to white, Rex's bark echoed once more, distant, timeless, unyielding. Then, in quiet lettering across the screen, "He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth." Below it, a final line appeared. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Follow, share, and support stories that honor the courage and loyalty of the German Shepherd, the guardian who never stops watching.